Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today we have September 20th, and this is another of our bi-weekly SIG CLI calls. My name is Maciej, and I'll be your host today. Quick announcements. We are barely after the 123 feature freeze date or enhancement freeze date, and we have a good couple of weeks for shipping 123 items. If you need support from myself or Ken or Janet, feel free to reach us on SIG Apps Slack channel. But most importantly, in a couple more weeks, there will be a SIG Apps update during KubeCon North America in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, none of us will be there in person due to different circumstances, but we are very hopeful that the next one, and I have no idea where it will be held, but it'll be Europe, somewhere in spring next year. We are very hopeful that the next one will happen in person with significantly more people present there. I put the link to our presentation so that you can mark it and watch it. So I think that's the most important topic, and we can move on to the discussion. I haven't seen James popping up, nor he did respond to my pings on Slack. So we are jumping James this time, and we can start with Sydney. Sydney, I assume you're our first time in SIG Apps, so feel free to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about it. Oh, one simple question. Are you planning to share your screen?
I would love to share my screen if possible.
Okay, so let me quickly make you a co-host because that's needed to be able to share your screen, and I'll stop sharing so that you should be okay. You should be good now.
All right, let me just get set up to share my screen. But to give you a little bit of an intro, yes, this is my first time at a SIG meeting in general, and SIG Apps especially. I'm super excited to be here. Today I have like a custom Kubernetes operator that I wrote, and I wanted to see if there was any interest in it. I'm really struggling to present my screen. Sorry.
Welcome. We're glad to
Hi.
see you here.
Sorry. I'm just very nervous, and I've done this so many times and I can't seem to find the presenter view.
There should be a uh, you should be able, there should be something called share screen, a green button. You're using application
I'm
or
using
the web one?
the application. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so
Okay.
there should be a green share screen at the bottom of the app.
All right. And then I should be able to just share like Keynote or whatever it is.
When you click the share screen, it should allow you to pick which part of your screen you want to share, all the way down to a particular screen. That's what I've been seeing in the
All right.
past.
I'm just having some system preferences stuff open up now. And I don't think I'll be able to share my screen today because I believe last time this happened, I had to like restart. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Hey, no worries. That happens. Do you have your presentation somehow published somewhere so that I could share them?
It's just a Keynote, unfortunately.
Okay.
I can just do it verbally if people don't mind that. The
Sure.
most of the content that was visual was kind of just a animation explaining the difference between the way that Kubernetes natively rolls deployments and the thing that I built. But to not have us delay any further, let me just tell you a little bit about the thing I wrote. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
I work on a custom controller that helps deploy applications that cannot use, well, do not necessarily fit the same mold of deployments that can be blue-green or implemented in a way that uses services as a way to manage dependencies in between deployments. And it doesn't necessarily allow you, like, it doesn't really fit the Kubernetes native microservice architecture. So my controller does not replace blue-green deployments. If you use blue-green deployments, go ahead, keep doing that. It does not replace stateful sets. Stateful sets are useful and have their own niche. Same with deployments. We are not replacing deployments. What we are doing in our controller is effectively grouping sets of deployments so that from version A of deployment first, second, and third, you can go to version B of deployment first, second, and third in a rolling manner, such that the deployments act effectively like pods, the same way that a replica set manages pods. And so then instead of rolling within a single deployment with a replica set, you roll between two different deployments within I call it deployment set. And what this allows you to do is adhere to dependencies as you bring up your first, second, and third deployments. So when you switch versions, you're able to deploy a whole new set of deployments that are first, second, and third, but perhaps they're incompatible with the first version you deployed. And then secondly, it allows you to maintain that version incompatibility. So we've got dependencies, and we have this somehow inherently your microservices team perhaps is not very great about reverse version compatibility and making sure that you can work with all the other systems, all the other services that need to be deployed in unison. So this really manages it for you, and you don't have to necessarily worry about version incompatibility because it's built into the structure of how you're deploying your deployments. Does anybody have any questions so far, or things that you think are concerns, or why are we doing this?
I have some questions, but I can wait till the end of the presentation.
Okay. So in essence, that's what it does. And it does it through 3 different resource definitions. We have the deployment set, which is like the big bucket. We have the deployment set version group, which is effectively like a replica set for the same way that replica sets live in deployments. You don't really touch them, and it just kind of manages the underlying objects. And the underlying objects nested inside those version groups are deployments. And the deployments get kind of spawned off of this object called a deployment set template. So our 3 resources are the deployment set version group, and the deployment set template. And the way that you would create this is you would post a deployment set object, and it would have your 3 templates listed underneath. So it's just by name. So first, second, and third. And then you would post 3 templates named like first, second, and third. And each one of those templates would have a dependency array, basically like, oh, first doesn't depend on anything because it's the first deployment to go. Second depends on first because it's the second deployment that needs to be up. And then lastly, third would depend on both first and second. And so in this way, you have the ability to describe dependency between your deployments. And then when you want to update and roll to your new version, you would basically just repost the deployment set, but instead of like first, second, and third, you do like first version 2, second version 2, third version 2, and then you post 3 new templates with that new deployment config basically updated with the same depends on like array. And then that would bring up a whole new version and kind of like have it independently roll between those 2 versions that you said, like version 1, version 2. And as far as the actual deployment set template goes, it's basically a deployment spec object with a little bit of extra data that lets you do the depends on logic on top of it. So it's fairly simple. It's like not a lot of frills. Basically, we just wanted dependencies, and then the grouping allows you to do that version incompatibility role. So there are a few other existing solutions. So there's obviously blue-green deployments, but the reason why I like the controller that we built a little bit better, because when you do blue-green, you have to basically do 200% of your resource allocation when you do versions. And with ours, we're actually able to roll gradually in between. And we've also implemented max unavailable and max surge between these deployments. So you can say like, oh, max unavailable is 30% and you drop 30% and you're able to gradually roll and only consume like 100% of your resources between these two things, while also maintaining the ability to like roll back and other fun things. Another solution that exists today is like Kubernetes like SIG application project. But I feel like that focuses mostly on like the application abstraction of like tying deployments and stateful sets and services all together, and not necessarily focused on versioning incompatibilities or rolling. At least that's my understanding of the project. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. And then another project that exists is Argo rollouts. I know that's very common and very popular, but again, it kind of only focuses on blue, green, or canary. And underlyingly, it relies on the replica set, basically, of the deployment to manage the version roles, whereas what we want is to roll between two different deployments. And then lastly, like you could do this really cool thing of having each one of your services be its own actual Kubernetes service, and I'm using like liveness probes and like readiness probes and stuff to kind of manage the rolling in between these two services. However, that still requires that you have like robust version compatibility between the services as you roll, even if you roll each service independently. And it means that for some legacy applications, you'll have to break out each one of the components of your monolithic service into a separate service, and not everybody wants to do that. So I can pause for questions here, but I can also keep talking if you guys have any. Yeah.
I would probably just let you finish, and then I'll let Ken answer his questions. I have a few that are popping in my head as well. So.
All right. So in essence, what this project is really aiming to solve is allowing gradual rolling between incompatible versions, minimizing the resource footprint during a roll, and deploying like monolithic / legacy applications that don't necessarily have the Kubernetes microarchitecture in mind, so that you can adopt this first and then work with your application team to break up your monolith. But this way you're able to move to the cloud, and you're able to move to these like Kubernetes service providers and move off of existing like legacy hardware if you want. So that's it. Thanks for listening. I know that was a lot and I probably talked really fast. So if there's anything I can repeat or clarify, please let me know.
Go ahead, Ken.
Thanks, that was awesome. I guess my first question is, okay, so like from what you're saying is, I have this application that's composed of multiple deployments. The deployments are like A, B, and C. A depends on a new version. The new version of A depends on the new version of B, and the new version of B depends on the new version of C to roll out. So under that constraint, you said you handle rollback. If you issue a rollback, how would rollback work in a way that actually was like kept the application alive when you roll back? Or is that just not like a non-goal?
No, that's a great question. So basically, if you have A, B, C, and then A prime, B prime, C prime, what happens is A, B, C gets scaled down to like max unavailable. So it'll be 70% available. And then A prime, B prime, C prime, depending on your worst case, let's say it comes up a little bit, doesn't come up at all. Then what happens is that old deployment doesn't actually get deleted. So it exists at like whatever capacity. So let's say you were able to bring up 20% over here. That means this one will drop to 50, but it'll still exist. And so if you roll back, all you're doing is basically saying, okay, we're giving up on this one and we're pointing back to this structure, make it healthy again.
I see.
So that's how that
And
works.
so like with this approach, what you're doing is for A, B, and C, there's a service in front of B and there's a service in front of C. When you create A prime, B prime, and C prime, you have a B prime service and a C prime service as well, for which the pods of A prime used to communicate with B prime and C prime.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then when those spin up, and does your controller manage the deployment of those services as well, or are those separate resources that would be included in the manifest alongside the controller?
Yeah, so that's a separate resource. So basically when you would post the like template objects, you can like post the new service objects with them. If you want to do it that way. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I guess my other question is, so how is ingress handled at the front end, right? So like if you're using services to handle east-west traffic between your deployment, the north-south traffic, I mean, assuming it's not all back end, but you're actually pushing some traffic into your capacity in order to serve user-facing requests, right? When you're doing this rollout, is there any, like, are you just using an ingress to route between them, or is that managed independently as well?
So the ingress, I believe, just maps to both of, like, let's say you have front end services, like it just maps to both versions of the front end service, because both of them should be able to take traffic if they're up. You might need to tune like max unavailable if you want to drop at all, if you don't want that. But yeah, so we just kind of split across the two different versions.
Okay. And then I don't want to monopolize time. I have two more questions. What about horizontal pod auto scaling? Like traditionally with most of the approaches that attempt to do resource sensitive updates, rolling updates, you would just use auto scaling and like let traffic pressure create the scaling requirement for the individual subset. So like it seems like the community is largely letting the ingress determine the shape of the workload as opposed to scaling up the workload statically and then letting it just handle the traffic coming through.
Oh yeah, and we do that too. So one of the slides that I actually did accidentally skip over is the features slide. So we do rolling updates between versions. We are HPA compatible. We've implemented a max unavailable and max search. We have VPA compatibility coming, and we're also working on Kita scaled object compatibility. But basically HPA looks at the template object that we've created because it has a scale sub resource. And so what happens is that the template object then tells the underlying deployment what its replica should be, but HPA talks to the deployment set template object. We've also implemented a cool like inheriting replicas feature where basically if you've had HPA enabled on ABC, then when you roll to A prime, B prime, C prime, you can inherit the replica count that HPA had previously described for the old object. So like you have a very seamless and you don't have to worry about the fact that you're creating a whole new deployment and trying to figure out what that magic number is for how many pods do you need.
That's quite nice. And then my last question was, you gave out a couple of, so you talked about Argo CI as a potential solution. The other one that didn't actually come to mind because it is very different than the approach that you're taking. What did come to mind though is Flux 2.0. In prior versions of Flux, you weren't able to really, in a very concise way, specify dependencies between resources. But in Flux 2.0, you can specify kind of arbitrary dependencies between resources, which would allow you, in theory, to achieve something similar. So I was just wondering, did you guys pilot that and kick it out? Because like basically to make Flux work, you have to be all in on GetOps, or was you really just not aware of that, that as a technology?
I'm not aware of when Flux 2.0 came out. This project I've been working on for maybe 2 years now. So when we were looking, there really wasn't anything.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you. That's all I have. Majid?
Yeah, so you mentioned explicitly 3 deployments in your controller. Is there any particular reason why you pick 3, or is it just you can have as many as you wish being managed by this particular controller?
Oh yes. So I gave examples of like A, B, and C, or first, second, and third, just to give you an idea of like the 3 cases that you might have in a deployment. So like your deployment that doesn't have anything that depends on anything, the middle one that's kind of in between, and then the top one that's just like depending on everything else in the stack. But it doesn't even need to be a linear tree. It can just be like you have some that are like, you know, your top tier, your middle tier, and your bottom tier, and the lists are basically just lists of the things that that deployment expects to be up before it can be fully available. And what I mean by that is not that deployment A has to be fully up before deployment B can be up, but actually we do this on a pod level. So if, let's say each one of them has 10 pods, if one pod of A is up, then one pod of B can become up, and then C can have one pod as well. And it kind of grows in this pyramid shape of like, all right, as long as there's something beneath me that I depend on that exists, then we can do it. And it can be like multi-dimensional. Like you can have 2 things that are like your top tier and a bunch of different bottoms. And,
yeah. So you're not looking at min available specify at the deployment level. You basically always look in under the covers and ensure that there's one running, which theoretically allows serving traffic. My next question was, I don't know, I'm just crazy when it comes to making stuff generic. Is it only meant to manage deployments, or you are thinking, or I don't know, maybe you already started implementing a broader scope of workloads, such as daemon set, stateful set, especially that at the beginning you did mention a couple of them. So does it allow all possible built-in kube workload controllers, or only a subset, or only currently just deployments?
Currently just deployments. I think that is more of a resourcing issue, just because for a very long time, there are very few of us, / only me, working on this. So we were trying to, hit the MVP and build out the feature set that we needed. But there's no reason that I can think of that would prevent us from generalizing this to the generic workloads that Kubernetes supports. I'm sure there are difficulties, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is, and that probably goes all the way back to the earlier days of Kubernetes, was that we don't have a good way of having any kind of template for a resource. You would have to have a unstructured data, which would be then translated as a proper template for stateful set, daemon sets, deployment, whatever you want to support. Or you would always have to have a full specification of all the possible controllers explicitly specified in your configuration file. Cool, that sounds pretty interesting. Does anyone else have any questions for Sydney?
I have one more if no one else has any.
Go ahead.
How do you keep the, so do you have a dependency analysis in place to ensure that if the user specifies like cyclic dependencies, which would prevent it from actually making progress, to give some feedback and say, you've got a dependency cycle, we can't actually roll this out?
That would be very smart. We do not have that at the moment. We kind of statically generate the dependency tree when we generate the deployments on our side. So we know that at the point of creation, we don't have any cycles in our dependency structure. But yeah, we should probably check that if people are just willy-nilly adding in freeform YAML and saying, I want this deployment to depend on this one and vice versa, then it's never going to come up. I think you're muted.
Yeah, in like if it's a simple dependency graph, I wouldn't see it as being particularly troublesome. I think like one of the kind of founders of the Brian, two of them, Clayton and Brian, both have been very opposed to like, we always kind of advise users, try your very best not to have dependencies between individual deployments, because it's going to make your life in terms of releasing, like even if it works today at a very small scale, when you get to a larger scale, your life is going to be hard. So it's one of the problems you may want to get in front of, as opposed to waiting too long to address, right? So like, I could imagine much more complicated, larger applications that take this approach would have dependency cycles that they would just not be aware of when they're releasing it. Like, it's just somebody adds this new dep, and all of a sudden, oh, well, it depends on dep A, and now you've got this cycle and it's unresolvable. So it's not something I would imagine happening on day 0 or even day 1, but for like day 2 operations, I could see, yeah, I mean, I've seen people do it before. So that would be my only thing. Like that would be an awesome feature.
Yeah, I don't think that this tool necessarily aims to like resolve like operators of managing the dependencies and the dependencies between like their deployments. I think, you might want to face that problem before you start deploying. But I think what it does do is that once you have that dependency structure described, that it'll just enforce it for you. I know from experience, having seen our deployments, that when there are dependencies, lots of other things happen. Like you can't even like have HPA scale up your deployments intuitively, because you can't just scale up your front end without scaling up your back end and other fun things. So
cool. I'm curious if there's a chance that the project will be available for people to have a look at it. I remember that Paris mentioned me on Slack that you are on a path to expose this to broader audience. Do you have some timeline around how this will be achieved?
So I'm going to be working with Paris to get an internal approval process going so that we can hopefully expose this to the wider community. My intention is to donate or just make it available at the very least to people, because I think that there are probably other applications that could benefit from this as well. Because 2 years ago I was looking and there's absolutely nothing, and now we have a few other projects, but none of them quite fit the bill. As far as timeline goes, I'm most interested in this right now, so I think I'll be pushing this pretty hard on my own personal timeline. I don't have any date guarantees though, so in the near future, this is what I'll be working on. I don't know how long these processes take, but I'm, going to be doing this pretty much every day. So
Cool. We will be definitely glad to see you join our future SIG Apps call.
for sure.
Last call for questions to Sydney. Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Sydney, for interesting presentation. Does anyone else have any topics that they want to bring and talk with the group? Okay, hearing none. If that's the case, we have about 30 minutes left still. I would like to use this time so that we can go through issues. We have a bunch of issues that has not been looked at for a bit. So I would like to use this time for us to be able to go through at least the recently created ones and try to find an owner. If you feel like you would like to give it a chance, feel free to volunteer and we can work on those topics. The first one is, and I'll post the link in the chat as well, is on delete for daemon sets, terminates running pods without waiting for the pod to exit. So that looks like a rather new problem on Cube 121.1. It looks like Paco was commenting on this one. Okay, so he claims that the pod got terminated, but it continued to run. And there's a similar issue about requiring during scheduling, ignoring during execution. Anyone interested in digging through daemon set controller? Looks like a valid issue to me. Probably need a volunteer who would be interested in looking into that one. Okay, I'll have a look at it after this call and I'll try to respond. This one is similar. Job controller. So since that will be my area, let me paste.
So, Majek, for that last one, it's not clear to me what the op was actually Like it seems like he said at first it terminated, and then he said that
he couldn't get it to run, even though that there was a taint
well, but it
anti-affinity.
says
But the yeah,
so. Okay, the top, like I don't know what to do with this one because it says this immediately terminated the pod running on node B, and then
which is
directly
fine.
below. Oh, that's what he expected to happen. Okay.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
fine. If he immediately terminated because he added anti-affinity, that means yes, it should be running just on the node A and not on node B, and that's fine.
Well, but it's
Then
ignored during execution, right? So it shouldn't actually do that. The affinity rule was required during scheduling and ignored during execution. But well, I guess we could try to reproduce it. I'm still not exactly sure what.
I'm a little bit confused as well. I would have to have a like very give it a try, see what's going on in the first place, because I kind of feel like it is working as designed, but I'm not 100% sure that I fully grasp what he wants to do. Because he claims that later when I deleted the pod on the excluded node, so he was expecting that the pod will continue to run even though the node was excluded, which basically means, yeah, that's not how it will work. If you set a explicitly anti-affinity rule, the node controller will check and the pods will not match what the controller has specified, what is specified in the spec of the controller. So it would obviously kill the pod, and he expects the pod to continue to run. So I think, if I'm correctly reading it, that it is working as designed. But like I said, I would need to have a closer look and try to follow the steps. I'll make sure to give it a try, unless you want to do it, Ken.
You can give a go at it. I was just saying this though.
Okay. So you want to give it a go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Oh, I always forget that I have a friend who has 0 instead of O, and I always somehow confuse you with him. Okay, let's have a look at the second one. Let's have a look at the job. I already pasted in the chat. Oh, I know what he means. He basically says that he had a pod which failed not because the pod failed, but because, for example, a node disappeared and the pod gets recreated, and he would expect that it's not recreated. But the problem is that as long as the pod fails, we know we should not restart. But in the latter case, where it was running but is not running, the controller will recreate it because it didn't fail. So we don't meet the criteria for not restarting it again. Honestly, in this particular case, I think my proposed approach would be to just run a single pod. If you don't care about restarts or anything, it should If it works, it works. If it fails, don't do anything. I would probably suggest to use a regular pod instead. I'll have a look at it. Since that's my area. Improve tests for release controller revision. Oh, let me paste that one in the chat as well. Okay, I think someone just created an issue just to fix something. I'll have a look at this particular case at PR. Not sure if anyone was already. Okay, I'll have a look. Controller revision, I think that might be ours. Although it's also touching controller, garbage collector. So he went with a lot, but yeah, I'll have a look at it as well. Unless someone else is also interested in. Okay. Helm uninstall chart. But replica set and pod exists on Kate. Yeah, my initial thought was that he created the chart and then removed it, and at the moment when he was checking, the garbage collector did not complete its mission, or alternatively, there is a problem that so garbage collector works that it has to have a complete view of the cluster at any point in time. Meaning that if any of the especially external API services is not present, it cannot continue. And I've been answering so many questions from our customers about this issue, that they have namespaces stuck in terminating. And most frequently, that is also related with the fact that there was, I don't know, for example, third-party API service that during the garbage collector collection phase was not available. So the garbage collector held removing the resources. So this seems like a similar issue that either the person decided to remove.
I'm with Tim on this. I don't think this is
Yeah.
a
No,
Kubernetes issue. This is a Helm issue.
It's probably either a deployment that is not proper. Well, deployment will be always correctly specified, but it can be either wrongly removed deployment with Cascade Orphan, like Paco is saying here, or it's something external, but definitely not a Kubernetes bug. I'll write a comment after this call explaining what the actual cost could be, and yes, most it'll be something to close, not for further look. Make scheduling directive mutable for jobs. So this is actually being worked on because we have a cap that was merged just recently, and if I remember correctly, I was even commenting on this one. Yeah. I'll just tag it as what other labels we are missing. Just trash accepted, and we'll assign. Can't remember who was working on it, whether that was Aldo or okay, so that's especially that this is being handled by the SIG scheduling more than us. Let me paste that quickly in the chat. Did I paste that? Okay. So consider pod disruption budgets to allow zonal distribution disruptions. That's an interesting. Ken, do you have any thoughts about this one?
Yeah, I mean, like if you label your deployments or, well, so the way I would do it would be to use separate stateful sets. And if you want to ingress them into the, like ingress traffic into all of them, have a selector that selects across them and then have a separate pod disruption budget per zone, right? So, you know, basically intentionally manage your capacity if you're that sensitive to it.
You want to comment about this
Yeah.
proposed approach on this one? Yeah, that would be cool. Okie doke. Another pod disruption budget. Usually paste it in the chat. Interesting. That seems like about, I wonder if you mentioned let's keep 119. Well, between 119 and today, a lot has happened, especially around the GAing time. Can't remember that whether that was 120 or 121. Although if I remember correctly, we didn't update anything around the statuses. There were some minor fixes, but I can't recall anything bigger with regards to the PDB functionality. That should be working. That looks like a bug initially. on the other hand, I wonder if I should probably revive a PR from Tomasz, because a lot of times people expect that the controller is already up to date right after invoking the delete command. And they are immediately checking the status, which can take up to a couple of seconds to catch up with what has happened in the cluster. I wonder if that's this kind of situation. Is anyone interested in looking into this one? Philip, you want to give it a try?
Yeah, I can give it a look.
Okay, cool. Remember that this is, oh, I can't assign you yet. Remember that he reported that on 119, so it's possible that we have it fixed in the newer version, and 119 is shortly coming out of support window. Okay, let's have a look at another one. Let me paste that one in the chat. What sandbox creation fails when namespace name plus pod name is more than 217 characters? And I'm pretty sure that this is more of a node thing rather than app thing. I remember we had that issue before, and they were changing how the underlying container runtime reacts.
This is Node though, not us.
Yeah, that's definitely Node. I have no idea how to remove a SIG. I'll deal with those later, but it's definitely.
Yeah, you should probably do him a favor and add SIG Node too though.
Yeah, I'll do that. I just need to figure out how to remove SIG apps, and I want to
But remove SIG. I got it.
You got it? Okay, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Okie doke. So another one. Error deployment XXX sit exceeded its progress deadline and rollout status check failed. I have no idea. Oh, okay, there's something in here. Yeah, that looks like a bug with a particular app that he was trying to run rather than with the deployment itself.
Yeah, I'll respond. I got it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, but definitely looks like a bug on their end. Okay, the next one would be stateful set name accepts DNS subdomain standard, but pods controlled by stateful set accepts DNS label standard. I think I looked at it.
What? Ooh.
The problem is with different validation for stateful sets and for pods controlled by created by stateful set. One is following subdomain standard and the other one DNS label standard. And
So
someone
it's a
opened,
validation.
yeah. It's a validation mismatch between the two.
I'm gonna go.
I basically
I'll
agree with
accept
Jordan.
it.
Okay.
I mean, it is a bug, but it's not going to get fixed the way they want.
Yeah.
It's going to get fixed by adding extra validation in stateful set.
Yes.
So
That's probably what Jordan is also saying. Someone else was trying to do conversions, but definitely conversion are not the way to go with this one. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Let's give it a try to one more. Oh, that's something for me. Cron job controller v2 breaks at every interval jobs. Yeah. I need to definitely have a closer look at it because it looks like during the cron cron parsing library that we've updated in the past release, we allowed a little bit more a little bit more specification around how time can be passed, up to the point where we are allowing to passing a time zone apparently, which is something that I learned last week. I need to double check that one, and I'll have a look at this one because that's something that we need to double check. Okay, I think with 3 minutes left, does anyone have any final thoughts that I want to share with the group? Final topics? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much all for attending today's SIG Apps, and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you all. Bye-bye.